painting friends, it's Stoof here. Welcome back to my channel. I am in beautiful Grand Teton National Park today. I'm at Leaks Marina. This is one of my favorite spots, a very peaceful spot to just sit and watch the lake and the mountains out in front of me. So today I'm going to do that, but create a plein air painting for you while I'm doing so. It is about 2 p.m. here in Mountain Time in the Tetons in Wyoming. I'm going to start to sketch out with a brush, and then I'm going to go over everything with a palette knife and see how that turns out. I don't work in palette knife very often, but I didn't bring any paint thinner with me, so let's try a palette knife painting today and see how that goes. So first I'm going to show you my materials, and then we'll get started on this beautiful painting. For my materials today, I brought this little travel easel. Simple little guy, about 30 bucks on Amazon. I have a link for that in the description under this video. It's nice and adjustable for different size canvas panels. So I'm working on an 8 by 10 inch canvas panel today. And then for my palette, I'm using oil paints. Because I flew here, I wanted to bring smaller oil paints. So I bought a budget-friendly oil paint set. It's the Winton Oil Color by Winsor & Newton. So all of these colors are Naples Orange, Naples Yellow, Portrait Pink, Burnt Umber, Magenta, Phthalo Blue, Cobalt Blue, Ultramarine Blue, Emerald Green, Yellow Ochre, Green Gold, Cobalt Violet, Sap Green, Titanium White, and Chrome Yellow. I'll also be working with a palette knife here, and there's my brush to sketch out the concept. Okay, to begin this plein air painting, I get out my viewfinder. That's that little tool I'm holding up right now. I can set that viewfinder to match the dimensions of my canvas. So I set it to 8 by 10 inches. I'm looking through that viewfinder to determine where everything is going to be in the frame on the canvas. I decided to place the lake line just below the 1/3 mark from top to bottom on the canvas here. I want the mountain to take up most of the painting in this scene. Next, I just took my brush and did some little squiggles where that tree line is visible out in the distance, just beyond the water. And next, I'm looking through my viewfinder, seeing where center is going to be in the painting. And for me, center was that ridge line right there coming out from the mountain. Once I got that ridge line identified, I then started to block in the top of the mountain ridge where it meets the sky. As you can see, I keep glancing back and forth between the viewfinder and the canvas to make sure that my proportions are accurate. My angles of the lines for the mountain ridges are accurate. I don't want to make things too steep or too bunched up or too widely spaced. I want things to look just right so that this mountain peak is identifiable when you look at the painting. I just blocked in a couple spots where the mountain has less snow coverage on it, so I know where to put more of the mountain earth color versus snow when I'm painting it with the palette knife. Okay, so I sketched out the concept using a brush, and now I'm going to go through with the palette knife. Okay, so sketching out the concept was very important. Now that I saw that my sketch in general looks accurate, I'm ready to start putting down the paints using my palette knife. I blended color for the sky, where I'm going to start to add that paint in, beginning with features in the far background and making my way to the foreground. Because I'm using a palette knife and not a brush, I still have to be mindful of how I'm putting the paint on the canvas. The way that the palette knife puts those streaks down on the canvas is going to give texture, and for the sky I want to have a smoother texture. So once I blended my color for that background sky using a mix of phthalo blue, a little bit of ultramarine and cobalt as well, with white and maybe a hint of emerald green as we're getting closer to the horizon line. I put that color down, trying to make the brush strokes follow that same pattern back and forth on a horizontal plane. And then I left a couple spots bare where I was going to put a couple little clouds. The clouds are pretty soft here. I didn't want to make them too intense. I wanted the focus to be more on the mountain and less on the clouds, so I didn't add too much texture to the cloud. I kept the same type of markings with the palette knife to get that horizontal back and forth markings so that we don't have too much texture. I also didn't go too heavy with the paint onto the canvas panel for the sky, again to try to minimize the amount of texture. I do end up putting more texture in when I'm working on these mountains. So now that I have that background sky filled in, I'm starting to go at the ridge of the mountain where the mountain meets the sky in my canvas. And I'm pretending like there isn't any snow on the mountain at first, just so I can get a nice definite edge for the ridge line there. Keep in mind that this camera angle is slightly different than my viewpoint angle while looking at the mountain, so features in the mountain may look slightly different than how the mountain appears from this camera angle based on what it appeared to me from where I was sitting. So to mix that color for the ridgeline, I wanted to get like a neutral purple gray, and as we're getting closer to the horizon line where the base of the mountain meets the water, we start to get more blues and greens visible in the mountain, more earthy blues and greens. And as we're farther up in the mountains, it's just a hint more on the purple blue side. And it's really, there's not a huge change in value here on this mountain ridge because I'm focusing on just that one ridge behind the boat in this area. We don't get to see the mountain on the right, which is closer to the viewer. We just see the little bit of the base there. And then the mountain on the left, we get to see just a little bit of that ridge. So I am going to do a bit to show the differentiation between these ridges by adjusting contrast and colors. But it's not too obvious like it is in some of my other paintings where we have like tens of ridges visible, with one being very close to the viewer in the foreground and one being much farther away in the background. These mountains are several miles away from where I'm sitting though, so there is quite a bit of atmosphere in here. So an important thing is not making those mountains too dark. I'm doing that by mixing in bits of the sky color with the color I used to mix the mountains, and then I'm just mixing those together, which kind of lightens up my value and tones down the saturation a bit. My next step in this painting was to block in the parts of the snow-covered mountain that are a bit more in shadow, or more of just like a base color, not illuminated very brightly with sunlight. And I mixed that color with a bit of cobalt, a little bit of Naples, and a teensy bit of like a Naples orange mixed with white. Next, I started to add in sections of the snow-covered mountain that are illuminated in the sunlight, so that's our warmer white. And to get that warmer white, I mixed a hint of Naples yellow, a hint of Naples orange with the white. Having a warm white and a cool white for the snowy parts of the mountain really help to give the three-dimensional appearance on the mountain as I'm putting these palette knife strokes onto the canvas. And to apply these palette knife strokes, I'm doing some little dabs where I'm placing the paints onto the canvas to get a bit more of just like a line look. And then I'm also pushing down with the palette knife and pulling it around to get more of like a stroke with a bit more texture applied. I'm taking the brush strokes in different directions based on the way that the snow or the earth is visible on the mountain, so kind of following the slope pattern. After I was pretty comfortable with the general placement of snow on the mountains, I started to mix the color for that tree line in the middle ground between the mountain and the lake. And to get that color, I mixed crimson or like a cool magenta red with my sap green. There's also hints of umber and ultramarine in there, but in general, these trees are going to be a warmer green than the green on the ridgeline behind it, and they're going to be darker shadows than we see on the ridgeline, which is a mile or two behind that tree line. After blocking in the shadowy parts for the trees, next I started to add highlights for each little tree that we see here, and I'm taking the palette knife in a vertical up and down pattern to apply these highlights where light is touching the pine trees. I mixed a little bit of my yellow in with the sap green to warm that up, a little bit more white as well, so that we have more contrast between light and dark values. And once I was done working on that tree line, I started to blend the color on my palette paper for the lake in front of me. I started with like a base, slightly darker value for the lake, and then I start to add some highlights over top of that. Basically, if you look at the lake here, it is darker in value than the sky in general, just a little bit, and it's also more green than the sky. I'm applying this paint onto the canvas panel, doing back and forth brush strokes, trying to keep those brush strokes pretty horizontal, just like I did for the sky, because most of the very little ripples of waves are on a horizontal plane as well. I was starting to get frustrated with the palette paper here because I noticed as I was mixing my paint on the palette paper that the palette paper was starting to fall apart. Like the little bits of plastic were starting to come apart on the palette paper, and that has never happened to me before while creating a palette knife painting. So I'm not sure if it had something to do with this brand of paint working on that palette paper. Also maybe the sun was a factor, like the heat from the sun on the palette paper, or just like the amount of pressure I was using while blending colors on this palette paper. But I was getting pretty frustrated that little bits of that plastic were starting to like peel apart, like the layers of the paper were peeling apart and getting mixed into my paint. So it was putting unwanted texture into the painting that was not paint. It was like bits of the plastic. So I do pick at the painting a bit to try to get those pieces out of there. Especially once it was complete, I did a bit more picking and looking at this painting just to make sure I didn't leave any little pieces of the palette paper in the painting. But once I did get that base color down for the water, I go back to that far edge of the water and I started to lighten things up using a bit more emerald green, maybe a little sap green mixed in with my blue, added more white as well to bring the value up. And I'm trying to keep that line nice and flat, pushing the paint back and forth with that palette knife. And then once I get that horizon line to a point where I'm pretty happy with it again, then I just go holding the palette knife at an angle to get nice, more thin markings on the canvas. And I start to layer in some highlights and some ripples, some shadows from the ripples onto the canvas panel. And the final step in this plein air painting was to add a couple little highlights where we can see the reflection of the snow from the mountains on the lake. So if you look just above the canvas, slightly to the left, upper left corner there, you can see a little bit of that highlight on the lake. So that's what I wanted to try to add to the painting. And that calls this a finished painting. You can see my messy fingers from picking the little bits of plastic out as I'm working on this painting. It took about 45 minutes to get to this point using a palette knife. Alright guys, that wraps up my plein air painting of the view of the Tetons from Jackson Lake at Leaks Marina. I completed this in about 47 minutes. For the most part, it was straightforward. I had not too many changing light conditions, just a couple clouds that moved, but they were pretty quick and easy with the palette knife. I got the sky done relatively quickly, so no issues there with the sky. My biggest challenge today was the palette knife, scraping the palette knife on my palette was picking up layers of the palette, and it was like breaking down. I guess I was pushing too hard. It's been a bit since I've used palette knife this intensely, so I would prefer to use a different palette in the future for these palette knife paintings, but other than that, I'm pretty happy with the results. If you guys have recommendations for future painting tutorials, then leave a comment below. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure you do so you don't miss out on future painting tutorials in beautiful places like this one. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and happy painting!